Hello, good evening, and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. And I have the extreme pleasure this evening to be welcomed by John Connolly, and we're going to be talking about his latest book in the Charlie Parker series, which is, I have here, The Instruments of Darkness, which is a really gripping read. And my first one, I have to say. So I've got 20 to catch up on.
First one? What have you been doing? What nonsense have you been wasting your time with that you're only coming to do?
I don't
Good
know.
grief, woman. Dear Lord.
Although
you sit on
it's
the
really
naughty
good
step
now.
and just think about what you've been doing with your life.
I do have 20 now to catch up on. So
well, you better get a move on. Get your skates on.
Well, my husband's a big fan of, he won't read. He thinks that it's an atrocity that I've read 21 first, and then because he's got number 1 on the shelf downstairs, which I am going to read next.
Oh, okay.
But he will go through them methodically,
meticulously. Okay.
Yeah. So John, it's 25 years since you introduced Charlie Parker to the world. And in that time, you've also written the Book of Lost Things, The Land of Lost Things. All of the subsequent novels have become Sunday Times bestsellers. So I was just wondering if you want to tell us a bit about Charlie, because obviously he's pretty fundamental in these books. And I'm wondering how much he's changed in 25 years, and probably like us, quite a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, he has watched his daughter grow up. One of his daughters grow up. I'm actually editing next year's book at the moment, just before I deliver it to the publishers, giving it a final polish. And there was a conversation between Parker and his daughter where she says, it's what you do is not motivated just by rage anymore and pain and hurt. That you have changed. That he's probably mellowed, I think, slightly. But that's true. That early book. Certainly the early books were a young man's books. I was 25 when I started writing the Parker books. The first one was published when I was 30, and I'm 56 now. I know it seems impossible because I'm so youthful and pretty. How does he do it? Retinol, basically, and good lighting. And so the way I look at the world and the things that interest me or concern me are different now. And one of the lovely things about having a character like Parker that you return to often year after year is that you get to explore those things through them. That as you change, your views of the world change, their views of the world change as well. I get frustrated sometimes when some people, or whether they're critics or writers or readers, are dismissive of genre fiction. And we'll look at mystery fiction and say, well, it's all about plot. These are just plot-driven books. And all good fiction is about character. All good fiction is driven by character. And character is the reason why readers return to a series over and over and over again. The plots don't change very much. There's a crime, an investigation, and a solution, and then we all move on. The real pleasure in reading a series is that you get to grow with the characters. And I also don't like writers who keep their characters frozen in some kind of permanent mid-30s or mid-40s zone, where nothing ever changes and they can still kick down doors and whatever it might be. It's been more interesting to let Parker and the people around him age, and because that becomes more that connection that I have with him, and the connection with my own life is maintained.
Because I wondered that with the sort of you must have. I mean, obviously he's part of you in a way, because obviously you've created him over the years and things. But have you sort of become fonder of him? I was wondering about whether you, when you started 25 years ago, that you thought you would still be writing him now. Did you ever look that far?
Oh God, no. I'm probably not alone in being shocked that I've maintained a career. No, I didn't. I was still so astonished when Every Dead Thing was accepted for publication. And I remember having that instinct that I think every writer who gets that call has, where you think, actually, can I have it back and I'll do it properly? That you really didn't expect it. And then you have to live with a lot of the things that you put in that first book, because you don't. anticipate that, years later you're going to have to,
Mm.
you're going to still be writing about them. And sometimes you do a bit of subtle reverse engineering as the books go on to try and iron out the creases. So no, I didn't expect to still be here. And at one point, I think quite early in the series, I was actually tempted to end it. I thought maybe I won't write Parker novels. Maybe I'll do something else. And thankfully that urge passed. And it passed because I took a break from them. I kind of became a writer, not by accident, because I had always written. I was published by accident, and then it all happened very quickly. And even though I tended not to sign long contracts, I did write the first 4 books in a kind of blur. And then thought, how did I end up here? And I suddenly also thought, well, maybe actually this may be something I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future. And I took 2 years out. I wrote a book of short stories, and I wrote a kind of a standalone novel, which kind of had some of the same rhythms of a Parker book, and he cropped up in it as well. But it was really a chance to figure out what kind of writer I wanted to be. And when I returned, the Parker books had changed. The nature of them changed because I realized that I wanted to write a sequence of novels that would come to a conclusion, where each book would be a chapter. Sometimes you get more information, sometimes less, in a larger narrative. And I also realized that I would go off and do other things. That if I was to keep writing these books, it would be a disaster if they were the only things that I wrote. Not only a disaster in terms of for readers, I think I would have got tired or burnt out or bored.
Mm.
And readers would have detected, because readers have a very good ear, and I would have shortchanged readers. But also, I wanted to be a writer. And to be a writer meant exploring the possibilities and the risk of failure and doing things that might not sell as well, but that allowed you to improve and learn. And I could only do that by doing other things. And then when I came back to the Parker books, I was reinvigorated. And what I had learned, I could apply to them. So they, I hope, got better as the years went on. Or at least they never shortchanged readers, and that they were always the best I could do at the time.
Because I mean, they're really the Instruments of Darkness I've just finished, because I like to always finish the book really closely to when I do the interview, because I have to do so many, I forget. Because
Sure.
I'm also not 25 anymore.
Yeah. Well, listen, I write things down, so
I do
that's
that
how old I
am. But so in the Instruments of Darkness, Charlie is brought into a case of a missing child with his friend Moxie. This lawyer has come along. He believes that Colleen, she's called, is innocent, although her husband believes that she's abducted and hurt their child, their little boy. I'm interested in the sort of the dynamics of writing about a missing child, because obviously that's got its own interesting and difficulties, but actually having the mother as the prime suspect was really interesting. And I sort of, because of the way you've written it, I didn't believe that she had done it, and her husband Stephen, nasty piece of work, basically, I was really interested in that sort of dynamic, because it's really easy for parents to become vilified in the press, which does sort of happen, doesn't it? And I was interested in how that sort of came about, really.
Actually, the book came about because I'm not a fan of legal thrillers. For me, it's a contradiction in terms. If it's legal, it's just not thrilling. And we all have blind spots in what we read, and legal thrillers, by and large, are one of mine. And I have no interest in courtroom dramas, really, apart from The Verdict, which I still think is one of my favorite films with Paul Newman. I just think it's a wonderful film. But that's interesting more for what happens outside the courtroom. And so I wanted to write a legal thriller, I suppose, that never got to court. That was all about the mechanics. It's one of the things that private investigators are not really very interesting in real life. They don't go kicking down doors, and they don't go hunting people really in that kind of way Parker does. But one of the things they often do is that they become embroiled in these cases and have to do that kind of legwork for lawyers, where you're knocking
Mm.
on doors and you're interviewing witnesses and you're trying to find out what positions people are taking on the case. And so it's a book in which there is very little violence in Instruments of Darkness,
Mm.
but there is a constant sense of unease. I liked that. I just wanted, from the moment you opened the book, I wanted you to feel slightly uneasy. From the moment Parker arrives at Colleen Clark's house, this dark house where she's sequestered herself because she's afraid to go outside, and
Mm.
she feels under siege, and she's sleeping in her child's bedroom because she kind of hopes that she wants to smell him because
Yeah.
there are vestiges of him there. And um and so I want to just the reader from the very off, not just to feel the sense of that there's a momentum to this book that makes you feel quite unsafe.
Yeah.
um and and also, as you said earlier, if you're writing a book about a child in peril, you need to be quite careful. You need to handle it in a very particular way. And that was another reason why the book would have, apart from a kind of flurry of it at the end, there is no violence, and any blood is the piece of evidence that's being used against her is a blood-stained blanket,
Yeah.
which is kind of as close as we get to any sense of what might have happened to this boy. But also, again, you need a lightness of touch, which sounds kind of contradictory in a way. But my books would be a book like that would be very difficult to read if it didn't have humor to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
don't want readers to be pummeled over the head, and you don't want to wallow in misery and grief. And it's always been something I've been very conscious of. One of the writers who I'm always baffled by this, that he's huge in the United States and really struggles to sell a book in the UK and Ireland, is John Sandford. And Sandford
Oh,
was
yeah.
a
Yeah.
writer. I was a writer I read long before I was published. And one of the things I loved about him is that Sandford had that lightness of touch. That Davenport books and the Virgil Flowers books have a streak of mordant. It's not cynical. They're never cynical, but they have a streak of mordant, dry humor running through them, and it leavens whatever is happening in the books. No matter how, and his books can get quite dark at times. They never feel oppressively so. And so I was conscious of the lessons that I'd learned from him when I was writing Instruments of Darkness. That I wanted, like I said, I wanted you to be uneasy, but I didn't
Yeah.
want you to feel that somebody was kind of trying to drown you in misery. That's not what the book intends to do.
No, and I think you said that feeling of unease. I mean, definitely, with it's not just about what's happened, but like you said, the houses, and you've got the other house, the Kit 174, which comes on quite, and I was thinking, well, this is dark when I was getting into that one. But actually, you sort of, as the book progresses, you find out more. And I actually really like that as part of a book, when almost there's other things that the setting is as important as the characters as well. It all sort of ties up, doesn't it? So was that,
yeah, I mean,
when you
place is hugely important in mystery fiction in particular. We tend to associate detectives with locales now, with the cities that they move through, and Maine has always been a character in the books. It is and this is one of the Parker books that really doesn't, apart from one scene, I think it doesn't stray beyond the borders of Maine. It stays within, and that's quite easy because you could drop Ireland into Maine and still have plenty of space for someplace else. It's a huge state, and it's an old state in that it was settled quite early. So there are these. It is possible as something like Kit number 174, this old house in the woods that no one has ever occupied because there was just something wrong with it from the time it came out of the and when you drive through, even I was wandering through Portland today, because that's where I am. I'm trying to finish a book, and I took a wrong turning and ended up at part of the city had no conception existed, but these gorgeous old, like 19th century fantastic houses that I'd never seen before, even though Portland's not a big city.
No.
I had just, simply just taking a wrong turning and realizing that there's a richness here that, will give me fuel for another 10 books if I wanted to write it. That just something as simple as taking a wrong turning on the way to an appointment meant that I discovered something
You
new
end up in
about
a
the
whole new
place.
world.
Yeah, exactly. So it's fascinating that way.
I love the because I mean I haven't been to Maine, and I loved so I'm from Devon, and you had an Exeter and a Topsham, and then there
Yeah,
was a
because
bar.
this is where all the first the Puritans and the people who followed, this is where they came. Yeah, so
Yeah,
Scarborough. Yeah, this is
Scarborough, and that's
Scarborough.
my grandparents are from Scarborough, so that was
Yeah,
another
so
one.
that's
Yes,
that's where Park. So yeah, it is extraordinary, those resonances from another time, that they were still trying to maintain a point of connection with the place they were never going to see again, which I think there's something very touching about that.
yeah, no, I think I really like that. It felt familiar, although unfamiliar in the same way, So
Yeah.
yeah, I like it all. I sort of, as the book sort of progresses, and we, new characters are introduced, and also there was obviously characters within it that I hadn't met before, because, as I said,
Because you've
sorry,
been remiss, I
sorry, I have
believe is
been
the
very
term.
remiss.
There
Do you
you
know
go.
what? When I worked in libraries for many years, until a
Well,
couple of
you
years
were working in libraries and you weren't reading
well,
my
and you
books.
were
This is
always
not
like,
getting any better,
your
Could have said,
books
if you were rescuing kids from burning buildings, I would have gone, okay, I can understand how you didn't get around to reading me, but yeah,
but I was
rub
always
it in.
shelving you.
Oh,
You
well,
were
that's
always
great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm going to shelve these, but I'll never read them.
I don't know why. You just passed me by, but look, see, now I've discovered you now after all these
Yeah,
years.
because
So,
there will be a test the next time we meet. So,
will there?
yeah,
I'll
we
have
can
had
write
to have
both
read.
sides of the paper.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you were always like, you were up there with the Lee Childs. You were always on the over 100 reservations for when your book came out. So I did sort of wonder. I thought, oh well, and John Sanford actually used to shelve quite a few of those. They were actually quite popular in our library. So
They're very good. No, I'm glad
yeah,
to hear it.
so but yeah, so going back to the other characters, so obviously that's other they appear as they go through, and I guess there's new ones that come along as well. So Sabine Drew was a very interesting character. I don't know how much to say about her. I don't know what you normally say when you're doing an interview about the book, but where she comes into it. But I found her really fascinating.
Yeah, Sabine is she has not appeared in the book before. That she is when something bad happens it attracts all kinds of Fruit Loops. If somebody
Yeah,
disappears, or you get all these people claiming to get messages from the beyond, and they're just looking for attention. And Sabine seems like that person, in fact. But as you scratch it, it turns out that there's something much deeper and odder going on with her, and she
yeah,
has retreated from public life, and is kind of looking for redemption, I think, and sees the possibility of it through Parker, I think, and what has happened. And also, she is a bit like him. She's not able to turn. She's tried to turn away from things and finds that that's not the answer either. There's a lovely line in a Ross MacDonald novel where he says, Archer debates it. He says the difficulty is always balancing your convenience against another person's pain. And and Sabine and Parker have that in
yeah,
common, that they're prepared to put themselves out for other people, and so they find these kind of two odd people find a point of connection between each other. Yeah, so she's there. So, but she hasn't appeared in the book before, and I'm not sure she'll appear in the book again. I think she
you think
she
she might
moves
just
in
be
and
a
out.
one a
Yeah,
one
I
trick?
think I can see her just going back to her little house in the woods and
Well,
staying there.
because of what happens to her previously to this book, which we find out, you can understand why she, wants to go and live in her little house away, but she's almost compelled, isn't she, to be part of this story because
Yeah, yeah, and I think it was important as well in a book that over the years I've become much more. I mean, I was always conscious of trying to give agency to female characters. I think male crime novels can sometimes be very, it sounds stupidly said, but very male focused.
yeah,
Um, and just as I made a decision a long time ago that actually, if people are going to suffer in my books, I should be an equal opportunity, sadist, and that I shouldn't really see gender, um, because it's actually very easy to write books in which, one of the reasons why I think there's a preponderance of female victims in books is simply, it's often just because we respond differently to the suffering of a woman than we do to the suffering of a man.
mm,
We just do. And writers are always looking for an emotional connection with the reader. You want the reader to feel something. And I do think that I wouldn't say we're dismissive about men dying violently in books, but I don't think it resonates in quite the same way with us
No.
as it does with and equally you have to be very, very careful with the suffering of children. That's something that has to be handled very, very delicately.
Yeah.
But I realized that was too easy a trope to fall back on. And so, certainly, I've tried to find other ways to make the reader react, I think. And also to push female characters, because Colleen in one way is she's such a martyr. She's
Yeah.
somebody who doesn't
You don't want
have.
to give her a shake.
You do. That's exactly what you want to do. You want to take her out and go, don't you? Is they're going to put you in jail? You
Yeah.
have to feel something. But at the same time, you can understand how somebody it's just too much for them.
Yeah.
What they're going through is just too much to have one of these things. Have your child go missing is one thing. To be then accused of harming your child is, surely you look at, say, somebody like, the Madeleine McCann's mother.
Mm.
Who was then vilified in a very similar manner, in a way that
Yeah.
we would just find extra intolerable now. I think we have moved on from that. And the idea that she's going through that at the same time as her child has disappeared, how are you supposed to react? And I suppose so it was important to have a character who balanced her a little bit,
Yeah.
who had a degree of agency, who wasn't prepared to be passive, and not leave it all just to the male characters in the books, who
Yeah.
have always formed a kind of focal point of the novels.
Because I think she does. She's, like you say, you want to shake her, but also it's really easy, I guess, for people to sort of point the finger, and also, her husband's pointing the finger as well,
Yeah.
and
And
to deal with.
grief incapacitates us.
Yeah.
If you're feeling grief, it's very hard to do anything.
Mm.
It's hard to feel rage. It's hard to feel anything. There's a numbness to it. And it's also a kind of protective numbness because everything is so exposed in there.
Yeah.
And, like I think back to my father dying, and I can't remember. I can remember very little about the days. I
Yeah.
can't remember my father's funeral. I mean, I was there.
Mm.
I have no memory of it. And I feel it just what I would have been in my very early 20s, but I'm sure it just washed over me because I wasn't capable.
It's like a protection, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
sort of,
I think it is. So you can kind of
yeah.
understand how Colleen, and I guess the people around her get frustrated with her because
Yeah.
they're trying to help her and she seems reluctant to help herself, but actually she's not able
No, she
to
can't.
help
I mean,
herself.
you can't imagine what it's like to lose a child, and I guess for everybody to be, because she doesn't. At the beginning of the book, she's obviously been, she has been, she hasn't been charged at this point, has she? Right at the beginning, and she gets sort of brought in. Charlie gets brought in to sort of help because it's obviously, it's imminent that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so at that point, she doesn't really. She's still quite. She doesn't, she's dealing with the loss of her son, but she doesn't really understand either, does she, that what's going on and why.
No, and she's not somebody who has a wide circle of friends, and
No.
she's quite frail. She's a little person, and she's not strong, and yet she turns, as the novel progresses,
Yeah.
she has a kind of resilience to her. That one of those things of numbing yourself in that way means that you can actually put up with a great deal of pain and a great deal of suffering. It's all, in her case, all psychological, but
Yeah.
she turns out to have a kind of interesting streak to her, I suppose. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's but to go back to what I was saying earlier, that it's about character.
Mm.
That's why you stick with the book, because the characters, and they have to have a kind of truth to them, even if that truth is sometimes uncomfortable, I think.
So does it, when you go back, because when you have your breaks, I mean, you've obviously written, you've had a break, you've had breaks, and you've written other things in the time. Does it feel good when you return back to Charlie? Is it like coming home, sort of it?
Yeah. Well, usually I kind of know. I'm reinvigorated, I suppose. I know what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I've had time to think and how I'm going to move things on. I think that's really, really important. Yeah, it is. And I've usually learned a new skill. by you don't learn anything. If I just wrote Parker books, I wouldn't learn anything new. It would be a real struggle to learn anything new. Um,
Yeah.
but by going off and trying a different style, or moving into a different genre, I'm interested in these liminal spaces, these places where different forms of writing overlap a little bit.
Mm.
So the Parker books have always had that blend of the supernatural and crime
Yeah.
novel, which was not really very typical and was frowned upon. I mean, Joyce Carol Oates is still putting things out on Twitter telling us that you can't have a supernatural crime novel, and I'm going, but I make my living from them, Joyce. Look around you, you know. Um, and so that's where the experimentation occurs. It doesn't occur in the center, in that safe spot. You need to take chances a little bit, and they're not always going to work, and some readers are not going to appreciate them, but I've done events with, Jeff Deaver is an interesting man because he has a completely different view of writing from me, I think, in that he very much looks at the readers and go, what does the reader want? I remember doing an event with him and he said, there's a reason why we only have mint flavored toothpaste. We don't have bacon flavored toothpaste because that's not what people want. And you're going, well, and I was there thinking, I was probably the guy in the factory going, we should try the bacon flavored toothpaste,
Oh, no.
just to see what happens. Because I'm sure out there's a small niche market for bacon flavored toothpaste. But Jeff would be like, no, you don't do those things. You stick with what readers like.
Yeah.
And I think that's a trap for writers. And it's an understandable trap because, most of us would like to pay our mortgage by what we do for a living.
Yeah.
And if you're selling X number of books because they feature Inspector Miggins and his pie shop or whatever it is, then then great, that's great. Then why would you not do that? Because it's putting your kids through school.
Yeah.
And to some degree, Parker has enabled me to go and do other things because the success of those books, or relative success of them,
Yeah.
has bought me a little bit of wiggle room. And I've had very supportive publishers, which is not always the case.
No.
And I know a lot of writers whose publishers say, we're not publishing anything that deviates from your series. We don't want
Yeah.
it. The bookstores don't want it. Your readers don't want it. So don't do it. Whereas my publishers have gone, well, we'll find a way to do it. If it's important
Yeah.
for your development, we'll find a way to do it. And so I've been very, very fortunate with both Hodder and Stoughton and Stoughton and Simon and Schuster in the United States. They have been from the beginning, have kind of found a way to publish almost everything I've done. And even if they haven't wanted something, I remember Atria Books, which is the imprint that I'm with in the United States, they weren't comfortable about publishing He, which was a book I wrote about Stan Laurel, simply because they're a very commercial publisher.
Yeah.
But it's just not what we do. And there was no falling out over it. There was simply another publisher who took it on, and that was fine. So they've only been very, and when they have, it wasn't because there was any doubt about the value of what I had done. It was just whether it fitted comfortably into the list of which I was a part. But generally speaking, we found a way to do what I want to do.
Because I mean, writing 21 books, I mean, you must have a huge fan base, and I was interested in obviously some have traveled faithfully through that journey, and I imagine that some, maybe there's I think even if you think about all the authors that you've read, there's going to be books that maybe don't you don't like as much as other ones.
Yeah, of course.
So has it been sort of quite smooth with your fan base, or have there been bumps in the road along the way because you have veered?
I think I realized that your readership over a period of time becomes like the concentric circles of a target, and at the center there's a little red dot of the people who got in the first week. And if it's got your name on it, they've either pre-ordered it, or they're waiting for it, or they're going to the library to get it. They're the ones who put their name on the reservation list.
Yeah, they're on the list.
They've signed up for the whole trip, and they see the connections between things that appear to be different initially, because they understand they're all the product of the same mind, and the same themes are going to be explored, but maybe in slightly different ways. They get it.
Yeah.
And outside of that, there are the people who will buy the Parker novels in the first week they come out, or second week, and maybe will wait until the others come out in paperback. If it's something they're not sure about. And outside that, there's a circle of people who'll buy if they're going through the airport and one of my books is there and pay, it's 2 for 1 or something, or it's, there isn't a Patricia Cornwell or something that they want to read, they'll pick it up. And outside of that is the vast mass of people who don't give a rat's ass about me one way or the other and never will, which until recently you were part of.
I'm sorry.
And a writer's career is predicated on those first two circles. They're the
Yeah.
people who will sustain what you do. And as long as they show up in some shape or form, your publishers will be okay, because your books will wash their faces, and that's very important for your publisher. Publisher doesn't want to lose too much money. But
Yeah.
some books haven't been immediate. The Book of Lost Things wasn't an immediate success.
Yeah.
He was a gradual success. Some books haven't been particular commercial successes, but they were interesting experiments for me, and I was glad I did them. And they were the best thing I could do at the time. And more to the point, they were what I wanted to do at the time.
Yeah.
I think if you sign a long-term contract with a publisher, you may sign, and I know that it's very common, particularly in the US, to sign 4 or 5 or 6 book contracts, because, especially if you're successful, you don't know in 4 years' time that you want to write your latest series novel, and you've taken the money. And so you
Yeah.
write this book that your heart isn't really in, and your readers, because they have a good ear, pick up on it. And
Yeah.
I've never wanted to be one of those writers.
And has your style changed from sort of when you so you said like about the first book is almost your sort of, your sort of
Yeah,
try
it's
out.
everything but a kitchen sink. Yeah.
Yeah. and do you ever look back at them? Do you?
No, I had to look at every dead thing when I was writing The Dirty South, because The Dirty South was a prequel to it, and I wanted the 2 books to mesh, and it was
Yeah.
torture. It was torment. There's nothing worse for a writer than having to go back and read something that they did, in that case, 20 years ago. You hope you've got a bit better. The style is probably a little bit more pared back than it was.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the first couple of books feel a bit overwritten now. And there are people who would still say that I'll often use 3 words when 2 would do perfectly well. But they were the 3 words I wanted to use, and it's my book. So I suppose there's that. And I write maybe a little bit more slowly than I did when I was younger. And I'm more prepared to set a finished draft, set it aside, and go and do something else, rather than immediately go back to the first page of the draft and start a new one, which was what I used to do. So those things have changed a little bit. And I don't feel... I think when you're younger, you're always trying to prove something to somebody, mostly to yourself. And now I don't feel that urge quite so much anymore. You realize your contentment is very underrated. And I'm now in a position where I could see myself maybe doing a Parker book every second year for a couple of years. There are other types of books I want to write, that don't easily fall into genre categories. And that's the path I want to take. So, I found a place where I'm reasonably content, and that's lovely to be able to say. And a lot of that is down to readers.
Because that pressure that I imagine you have in those early days must be quite overwhelming at times, to sort of get that book out every year, and to be able to give your readers what they want in a certain respect, I guess.
Well, you're always worried as well that all of this is going to be taken away from you. And I still have a recurring dream about sitting my final school exams again, because the writing thing hasn't worked out at least twice a year. I think we all have those dreams, but
We do.
Twice a year, they're quite specific. I am a writer. I am me, but I've had to go back to school because the writing thing hasn't worked out. And you always have this fear, certainly for the first couple of years, have this fear that, huge big guys are going to knock on my door and go, "Did you buy that television with the publisher's money?" And they cart out the television and the couch and whatever else have been bought. You do feel it's going to be taken away from you. And you fret about, I always were, and still do a little bit about, are the publishers happy? Are they haven't overpaid for this book. They're making as much as they're content with, and I'm not a burden on them. But when I was younger, I found that, and it translates into a kind of arrogance, I think, because it's a veneer for insecurity. When you're 30 and somebody's, telling you that, you're good at what you do, we're going to publish you, and you need to keep publishing these things, and here's the marketing exercise, and here's the publicity exercise, and this is what you're going to be doing. Here are the interviews that you're doing. It's alien territory. You kind of think, what God's name has happened? And you handle it as best you can, but you won't always handle it terribly well. And I'm sure there are some people, particularly in British writers, who probably can't stand the sight of me, based upon encountering me 20 years or so. But equally, I met some of them, and some of them weren't. I didn't find them particularly nice people.
No, horses for courses.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's, and you don't have to like everybody. It would be a very dull world if you did.
Exactly. And I think, it's, you have your sort of, everybody. I mean, I think, when you look at what books are popular, and, it does really change. You can have, as you go on and as you get older, your choices change, don't they? So, somebody who maybe was with you right at the beginning may not be with you anymore, or like me, come along at the end. Well, not the end.
There are a lot of books for people to read. There's no shortage of books for people to read. And I think as well, when you reach a point in a series like I have, when you're into 20-something books, it can actually be a bit intimidating for a new reader, because they're thinking, well, it's like arriving at a party and halfway through a conversation or a joke, and you're trying to think, well, maybe I should just go to one of those conversations that's just starting, where I don't feel that I have quite so much catching up to do. And I understand that. I think it's why at a certain point you don't really tend to build many more readers onto a series.
Yeah.
There's
I was going to say, I must admit, I didn't have a problem in picking it up and not reading the others, although I had questions about, what happened to Charlie, and
sure. You try and fill in as many of these gaps as you can.
But you want to go back, and there's several that when I was looking at your, otherwise it would be huge, be like the Bible.
It shouldn't feel like homework, and I do try to write the book so that you can pick them up, and that you're not going to feel lost. And then I've also, every so often, I often think of them as like Plato novels. Black Angel was one, Wolf in Winter was one, Dirty South was one, where even if you could pick up those books and join the series at that point, and everything would be clear to you. They were chances for readers just to dip into it and not feel that they had to go back and do everything else. If they wanted to do it for the pleasure of it, then God bless them. But those are books that from the beginning would clarify everything that was happening. And so you could jump in at the same speed as everybody else. And I think that's kind of one of the ways to get around that problem. But inevitably, if you're writing books like I remember Lee Child once saying that Reacher shouldn't have a memory, because he didn't want readers to feel intimidated in that way, that they could pick up any book and it was very much a commercial decision. I wanted Parker to have a memory. I wanted each of these books, if you did decide to read them in order, to represent chapters in a longer narrative that would have a conclusion. And in some books you would get clues to that larger narrative, and some books you wouldn't. But in the end, they were all moving towards that end, and that requires a different way of reading, perhaps.
Because I read in your notes at the back that you started this one at the end of the pandemic. Is that quite a long time? Was that quite a long time for this book to be, or was
no? That's kind of the way it's happening now. That they're taking a little bit longer to write. I just because I had other things,
you want to do other stuff,
I'm finishing a doctorate, so that was one of the things that I was doing as well, and I put together Shadow Voices, and I was doing a lot of other things. So I was kind of doing a draft of a novel and setting it aside and going on to one of the other projects and doing a little bit of work on that, and quite enjoying that thing of moving around between them. But no, now the books, I started a book last year that won't be published, I think, until 2026 at the earliest. So
wow.
But I've also written books that I've written in the space of a year. Some books just take a little bit more time, and some books there's a tendency sometimes to judge the value of something by the amount of time it took to do it. That's not always true in creative things. Sometimes songs or pieces of music or books are written very rapidly and are the better for it. They're the better for not being overthought. And so it varies. It depends upon the book, I suppose.
Do you I was thinking about your sort of, because obviously you write American fiction. What was sort of American crime fiction? What was it that attracted you to that in the
It
first place?
wasn't Irish.
Yeah,
That's
you don't
literally,
want to go down.
it's not even a glib answer. It was a way of escaping what I felt was a very insular tradition and a set of expectations about what Irish writers should be and what they should write about. And I think
Yeah.
Irish people have always looked to the United States for a form of economic escape, physical escape. But there was a form of imaginative escape in American literature, which seemed to just
Yeah.
have so much more scope and scale to it than the literature that was coming out of a very conservative small island on the edge of Europe. And that was it for me. It was not Ireland. It was everything that was not what I was doing. But inevitably, my Irishness fed into what I was doing, that Gothic element to my writing,
Yeah.
that fascination with folklore and the supernatural and the anti-rational. I don't write the way an American would write.
No.
No American writer is going to write that way because they don't have that cultural heritage, and that fed into what I was writing as well. So no matter how much you try to escape yourself, there you are,
Although it gives it's really unique, and I really like sort of folklore and supernatural in crime. I'm not a purist. I like crime, but I like that, and I found that really interesting in the book because it's not what you read in every sort of thriller, and I wanted something a bit more. So I think it challenges you, doesn't it? It obviously challenges you as a writer, but I think it challenges you as a reader as well, because it's not what you're expecting. Well, it wasn't what I was expecting.
No, and it's not typical. When I began writing, there was very little of it. It was, as you say, there were a lot of purists who felt that actually detective fiction, and I always preferred mystery fiction to crime fiction or detective fiction, because I think there was a broader scope to it. I think detective novels are very much, embedded in the rationalist tradition. That idea of the solution of a crime through a process of logic and deduction. Mystery fiction, I think, offers a little bit more scope.
Yeah.
And so that was what interested me. And I didn't realize when I began writing that it counted as coloring outside the lines. It was only much later that I realized that there was this kind of hostility towards the mixing of genres that never the twain shall meet, and a kind of snobbery. One of the things about detective fiction, I suppose, is that generally speaking, when writers of literary fiction move into a genre, they move into detective fiction because it has a degree of intellectual respectability that some of the others don't. And that goes right back to, T.S. Eliot was a big fan of detective fiction, pure detective. I think he loved S.S. Van Dyne. And Van Dyne was one of the real purists. I mean, Van Dyne was one of the originators of those rules about writing detective fiction. I think he wrote 20 rules. And he liked rules so much that the last rule has 10 subsections. He really liked rules.
He did really like rules.
Yeah, he really did. And Eliot wrote a couple of rules about writing crime fiction. They were people who liked order. And I think they were, I know Eliot had rediscovered his Christianity, I think, at that point, and was coming out it was the aftermath of the First World War, and there was a retreat towards order, I think. And I've never been comfortable with the view that the world is an orderly place, and that crime fiction, that kind of detective fiction, represents a return to the norm. It's the exception rather than anything else. And so that I naturally veered towards the anti-rational. And Irish writers, I spent it's partly my thesis, but also a lot of it's in shadow voices. Irish writers were always very willing to experiment. Uncle Le Fanu's Uncle Silas has little touches of the supernatural, and they're very, very subtle. But then writers like Charlotte Riddell or L.T. Mead were mixing genres. They were curious about what happens if you put one thing with the other, because it was all new to them. And never trust people who want to give you a set of rules about how you should do something creative.
Well, no,
it's a really bad sign.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to happen so much in science fiction or fantasy or historical fiction. It's almost exclusively detective and crime fiction that felt the urge to prescribe what people
put you in that box almost.
I think so, and it's quite persistent. It's only really in the last 5 or 6 years that it's changed, I think, or certainly in the last decade, that there's a bit more tolerance for that miscegenation of genre.
I was when I was doing my research, I saw that an interview that you done where you said that Wuthering Heights was one of your favorite
Yeah,
books.
yeah.
And I wondered whether that has sort of influenced, because obviously that's got the supernatural element and the, it's got the horror and it's got all of that, and written by,
Undoubtedly. Undoubtedly.
yeah,
As a writer, you're a product of everybody that you read. And
yeah,
that's why I think it's so important to read widely. If you do want to write mystery fiction, that shouldn't be the only thing that you read.
no,
That that's going to be a very narrow set of lessons that you've attended. And yeah, so Wuthering Heights was a huge. I've reread that novel so often. Yeah, I am a product of. I was lucky enough to be able to go to university. I got I was grant aided, and so I studied English literature. And my father was furious; he couldn't understand anybody would waste their life doing that. There was no way you were going to get a job. And I'd quit my job as well and cashed in my pension money, so he was doubly aggrieved. But I remember, all of those books that I read, and even I never thought I would find a use for Old English, and yet when
yeah,
I wrote the Lost Things, I went back to those old English words and Old English language, and that suffuses that book. So you never know as a writer, you store all those things up because you never know when something is going to spark into life, something that's been lying dormant in your head for so long.
And that's the thing, isn't it, with being creative, is that you never know when that's going to come up, and sometimes it can be hidden away, and then it'll just appear.
Yeah,
out
and I think you need to
really.
be quite magpie-ish as a writer and always be looking for
Yeah.
shiny things that attract your attention and sticking them in a box somewhere. I think and that's why you need to be open to influences beyond the area that you're working in, because if you're just going to work in that area, it's all been done before.
Yeah.
The only thing that's going to change is you. The two things are you, because no one will ever write like you, and no one will ever look at the world in quite the way that you do. And also pulling in stuff from outside to make it a little bit different.
Do you what's sort of next for Charlie? What's going to happen? You said you were writing?
Yeah, that's the book I'm finishing, which will be delivered, I think, probably next month sometime. Yeah, that will move everything forward a little bit. To quite a degree. In fact, I've pulled out a subplot from it that was actually just overburdening the book, but would have moved it even further. Because I think that series is, or certainly that sequence is reaching a conclusion. And then after that, I have the draft of a book that isn't it's a book set around the televising of the Watergate hearings, which will probably be the book for 2026. And then I want to write a couple of books that are not mysteries, that are just completely different. One historical.
So you must write. Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, you must write every day.
Yeah, no, I do. I'm very bad at taking time off, which is a pretty good thing if you're going to write. And also, I feel that if I write, then I've earned the right to go. Like after I've done, I wrote this morning, and I've just done. This is the second of 2 interviews, and I feel I've now earned the right to go and watch a movie. So I've earned the right to go off it. But I wouldn't enjoy the movie if I hadn't written. If I hadn't done some work, I really wouldn't be able to relax. I wouldn't feel that I had earned the right to go and do nothing except watch a movie. That's really interesting.
Really interesting. After all everything that you've done, that you still have that discipline. And I guess that is part of it. It's giving yourself permission that you can do it because you've done the job, the day job. I guess.
But you get very good at giving yourself little rewards to get you through things. There's the little things that keep the little things that stop us from going crazy.
Yeah. Do you who's your favorite crime writer, John? Who have you sort of gone back?
Well, I mean, there are writers who I will go out and buy on the first day. So thankfully, I've actually got one that I didn't have to buy because somebody sent it to me. So I just read the forthcoming James Lee Burke book, Cleat. And Burke was a big influence on me when I was beginning to write. Before I'd begun writing, he was one of the first modern mystery writers that I read after a period of just reading kind of classical mystery fiction. And I'm a big fan of, like I said, John Sandford.
Yeah,
I think Sandford is just, I think he's hugely, hugely underrated and should be so much more successful in the UK than he is. I mean, he's a huge writer in the US. So I'm just thinking there are 2 of the books that I bought this week where I just thought these are, one of the books I bought this week and one of the books that I was sent where I thought, actually, these are writers that and I'm very glad to have in my life.
Your sort of go-to sort of pick up, and
Yeah,
you would.
yeah, and I'm close to one or two writers. I think I've been reading. I think Mark Billingham's new series is very good.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
kind of very around a dancing detective. I think they are. I can see him when I was talking earlier about being reinvigorated when you go and do something new. When I
yeah,
read those books, I thought, actually, yeah, here was somebody who maybe wanted to take a little bit of a break from Thorne, and those books feel they have a lightness to them that I think is lovely. So yeah, I try and keep an eye, but I don't read as much mystery fiction as I used to. Um, and again, it's because I'm trying to find there are so many other books that I want to read, and
yeah.
and also
So many books.
they
Yeah.
influence me in different ways.
Do you find that sort of sense of freedom that you have now? Do you have that sense of freedom now that you sort of wanted when you started out? Have you sort of? Do you think you've come to that point yet, or are you still
I think
discovering
I've
what
reached. I think the real, if you're going to be happy in some kind of creative field that you're hoping to earn money from, the really difficult thing is to find a place on the two axes of the commercial and the critical where you're happy. Or
Yeah,
actually, the correct, and not just that correct, not just the commercial, and I guess your personal satisfaction with what you're doing,
yeah,
where that there's a kind of alignment, and I have fortunately reached that place. The critical, not so much. The critical, I don't tend to read reviews anymore, or I don't want to read an interview with myself because I know what I have to say.
you know,
I'm
you
not going
know,
to learn
yeah,
anything new. But I think that maybe what I mean is actually between the commercial and the point at which you feel a sense of satisfaction, creative
mm,
contentment. And I
yeah,
have reached that. I'm thankfully, and it's because, like I said, because of readers and librarians and very supportive publishers who have allowed me to do that. So I'm in a very fortunate position where what
yeah.
I do is what I love doing. And I hope that that comes through in the books.
Oh, definitely. And I think I mean, it's a big book. I mean, I was really interested in the weaving it all together. So how, do you write it as separate, or do you write as one continuous
No, I
narrative?
write as one continuous narrative, and I don't tend to plan. So I write very
Well,
slowly, piecing it together.
yeah.
Which makes it, that's why probably I write more slowly than I used to as well. That
Mm,
sense of you need to write 1,000 words to figure out what the next 1,000 words are going to be. And
yeah.
it's a very tortuous way of writing. But it's the only way I know how to, really. So no, I don't. But I rewrite a lot.
Yeah.
That first draft would have been unintelligible to most people. It's probably unintelligible to me. Um, but gradually, if you live with it for a year or two, it begins to come together. At the moment, the book I'm rewriting, you feel like you're filling in the gaps in the brickwork.
Yeah.
The little bit of mortar that needs to touch it up. But had the people seen it beforehand, they would have gone, "That wall's going to fall down." It's not the kind of wall that you would have stood under. But that's fine. I know that the first draft is never going to be very good. The eighth or ninth draft will be a lot better.
See, that's really reassuring for people, I'm sure, who are listening, that are, that think almost that you write that first draft and that's it, because actually that is not the case, is it? It's very few people, I imagine, if anybody, who writes the
Yeah,
first book and that's
somebody
it.
once said there are no great writers, just great rewriters, and I think that's
Yeah.
probably true. That your book is not going to be any worse for giving it another polish. But then I know there are some writers who deliver their first draft to their publishers. Part of it is that the editors are very hands-on in the creative
Mm,
process. That they like having all that feedback and the stuff
yeah.
about moving chapters and moving characters. I came from journalism where if somebody handed you something back, you'd done something wrong.
Yeah.
It was a bit like homework. So yeah, it has to. So when I give to the publisher, it is as clean as I can make it, and I
Yeah.
think I've usually spotted the flaws and the errors and tried to iron them out. So
Yeah.
it's not that I'm. And then the point is, when my editors suggest something, it's almost 99% of the time absolutely crucial to it.
Yeah.
Because actually I've got rid of the little things, and they might find one or two things, but those suggestions they make are always improve the book.
So just before we come to the end, we sort of talked about the instruments of darkness, and so for anybody who's joined us sort of later on, did you want to just give us a quick overview of the book? That's because it's out on May the 7th, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's Parker is asked by his lawyer to help prepare the defense for a woman named Colleen Clark who has been accused of abducting and possibly killing her child, but there's no sign of the child or a body. Um, yeah, and gradually he gets drawn into this realization that Colleen Clark may be telling the truth when she says she didn't hurt her child. But then the question is, who did take
And that
this?
is the question.
And that is the question. Yeah.
Quite a lot of questions, actually. Thank you so much for joining us, John.
Karen, it was a real pleasure. I really, really enjoyed it. They were lovely questions.
Thank you.
Don't forget about that test next time we meet.
I
Okay?
won't. I will.
Okay.
By the time we speak next time, I'll have read the other 20.
Well done. I expect nothing less of you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.